This is the Observations Podcast for the 25th of August, 2024. Michael is logging in. I'm Dale Franks. There he is. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hello. How are we all today?
We're a little irked today. Quite aside from the fact that I've spent basically all day after I had my coffee working out in the hot sun in the backyard, and I'm a little run ragged. I was irked by something.
A hot California sun, yeah.
Yeah, well, 95 degrees is hot no matter how you cut it. So
that is true. When you're inland, it's a lot different than being on the coast.
Yeah, when you live at the edge of the desert, it's not San Diego weather you're getting. I'll just say that. But I'm fine, showered, shaved, all clean shaven with my, this is not a sponsor, Henson shaving razor. I stopped buying cartridges, right? I went back to the old style double-edged safety razor from the 1930s. And you know what?
I didn't even know you could still get those.
Yeah. There's again, this is not an ad, but there's a company in Canada. It's an aerospace manufacturing company that decided to make precision safety razors. So you pull the top off, you put your little razor in there, and you screw it on. Those razors cost for 100 blades, it's like $5, and so they last forever. But
you only get one per side.
Yeah, but you get 100 blades for $5. Compare that to, 3 cartridges for $5. And these, the 5, 8, 12, 14 blade cartridges, they don't shave you any closer than a traditional straight razor. And because they're an aerospace company, what they did is they researched to determine what the perfect blade angle would be for a close, non-cutting shave. And they only stick out this tiny portion of the blade at that angle. It shaves just as closely as, the most expensive cartridge razor. So,
have you ever gotten a straight shave, or even, at the hair cutters, and they do it to the back of my neck. I've never had a complete straight shave, but, with just the old school blade, I mean, it gives you a really good shave.
In the military, whenever you went to the barber shop, if you wanted to shave, they'd pull out and strop that straight razor and they'd go to town on you. So in the military, I got a lot of straight razor shaves, but I'm a little uncomfortable trying to handle a straight razor myself. I don't think that would be as safe as they called it a safety razor in the 1920s for a reason. But anyway, I got all gussied up for the podcast, clean t-shirt, the whole 9 yards, and started doing my show prep. And there were some things I wanted to talk about, one of which was is it a Kamala Harris tax proposal or is it not? We don't know, because Kamala Harris still has not held a single press conference or interview, so we don't know what her policies are.
And there's no policies on her policy page or on her website, her campaign website.
Oh, yeah. We might want to take a look at that later, because something else that I wanted to talk about tonight. But, okay, fine. Let's see what we can learn about her tax proposals. Specifically, I wanted to check out what is being written about this galactically stupid proposal for taxing unearned income. So, being a good internet denizen, I went over to Google, and I did a Google News search for the past week for tax unearned income Harris, and that's the result I got. I thought...
That's it?
Yeah. So, okay. Now, again, tax unearned income Harris. past week, and we'll get rid of all that, past week, okay, sorted by relevance, and that's it. Let's just refresh it. Let's see if there's been anything changed. No, nothing changed. So I thought this was weird because so many people this week have been talking about her tax on unearned income.
Yeah.
So I just thought, I tell you what, let's just go to Brave Search. And let's just pull a Brave Search and let's see what their news search with, again, just limiting it to the United States, safe search, moderate. I know I had a thing on here that said within the last 2 days. Now I don't know how to do that in Brave. But in any event, here's a story from Newsweek 2 days ago. New York Times, finance.yahoo.com. A golf tax, not sure what that is. Unrealized capital gains. There's one from Fox Business. Here's one from Kiplinger. Now, here's one from Axios. That's Forbes. That's weird. Why do I go with a new search on Google? Why does it turn that up? And it occurred to me, you think you live in a free country. If you live in the United States or Canada or Western Europe, you've got this idea that you live in the West, you live in a free country. But you don't. Those who are old enough can remember what the United States looked like, say, in the 1970s. And we can compare it to today. And the amount of government control, the amount of things that the government has their paws into is astounding compared to where we were. And by the way, most of this change has happened in the past 35 years.
Yeah.
And
since
so
the era of big government is over.
Yeah, we have a free press. Well, do we? Because if I want to look up something in our free press and I want to go to Google and find it, why am I not finding it?
Yeah.
This is not a mistake, by the way.
No, it's on purpose.
This is intentional. Because if I just do a news search for tax unearned income on Harris, okay, well, I get this story from Blaze Media, but, that's Glenn Beck's deal, and he's some right-wing crazy who wants to read that. So why does Google, the best search engine in the world, show me this?
Allegedly.
Yeah, when Brave shows me all of this.
Right.
You are being censored, and the censorship is continuing because we just saw this fella, Pavel Durov, the CEO of Telegram, arrested in France. He is accused of failure to cooperate with law enforcement over, and this is very interesting, drug trafficking, sexual content, and fraud. They really love to throw in the drug trafficking, sometimes terrorism, and of course the child molestation thing. See, it's Telegram. There's a bunch of child molesters on there. We have to rein this guy in because you can't just allow people to communicate via an encrypted app that we can't see what's going on. And it's kind of funny. The Russian embassy wrote that several Russian officials condemned the businessman's arrest, saying it showed the West has double standards when it comes to free speech and democracy. The reason of that is because he had to actually leave Russia in 2014 because Russia was demanding, he was running what is now Telegram, but its predecessor was a Russian site called vKontakte. And again, it was just like Telegram, encrypted, and nobody could see what was going on there. He eventually bailed on Russia, he bailed on vKontakte and sold it and created Telegram in the West. And of course, the first problem with Telegram is end-to-end encryption. Not even the people at Telegram know what you're posting in your secured messages. Which,
Yeah,
of course,
there's no back door whatsoever.
yeah, because even they can't. Now, you can report if you get a secure message that, hey, this is spam or this is child sexual content or drug trafficking or whatever. You can report it and they can delete the thread, but they can't actually read the thread because they're using end-to-end encryption that even they can't break. And it reminds me, and most people forget about this, but back about, I don't know, about 10 years ago, whenever we were talking about 256-bit encryption, and the government realized we can't break that. And they delayed it under the Patriot Act for a couple of years to rolling it out to the public because we couldn't be trusted with encryption. Because,
Right.
bad people might do something bad in an encrypted message, so we can't just let everybody have encryption because that would be a national security threat. Funny how it's always a national security threat. The threat of misinformation, disinformation, terrorism, child, kitty diddling. All of that can't be allowed, so you can't have encryption. The area of freedom that we have seen constrict in our lives over the past 35 years is the government has been applying the frog in a pot analogy. They do little things here and there and here and there, and the next thing you know, the water is boiling, it's pretty hot, you're being parboiled, and too late. You can't do anything about it because they've closed it around you. And you look at what they've done in the EU this week. And by the way, we did it here in this country with a guy that posted a Hillary Clinton meme where he's looking at 10 years in prison on a Hillary Clinton meme. You think you live in a free country, but step out of line. Some countries are way ahead of us. Britain, as we've talked about, you can't. There's all kinds of things that you can't post in the UK now. And one of the senior constables at the Met Police actually came out last week and said, well, don't think you can escape the long arm of the law. Even if you live in someplace like America, we'll just prosecute and arrest you and have you extradited to Great Britain so that you can face condign punishment for your thought crimes.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the responses from Americans to that. Exactly why I love being an American, because all of them were basically some form of GFY.
Yeah, we don't have to abide by your line. I think it's interesting that Elon Musk is also just straight up refusing to comply with these EU demands to censor Twitter.
It was so bad that even it was one, I don't even know what title he has, but it was one guy from the EU, and the rest of the EU leadership was like, hey, we didn't approve this. We don't know anything about it. This is not what we're going to do.
Well, 3 or 4 days
it was
after,
pretty egregious.
3 or 4 days after the fact, sure. But
when he started hammering down, yeah.
But if I was Elon Musk, I wouldn't be scheduling any flights to Western Europe now.
No, and frankly, I don't think really any Americans should be, to be quite honest. I mean, it's becoming very 1930s-ish, 1920s-ish, 1930s-ish. And frankly, here in America in the 1920s, 19 teens, late teens, we were pretty bad too under Woodrow Wilson. But it's gotten, without having any kind of First Amendment, without having those sorts of protections, then the governments are left up to themselves to decide what is bad rhetoric, what is dangerous, what isn't. And you never know what it might be.
Interestingly enough, though, the threat, although in Europe, is coming directly from the government. It's either coming from Parliament or from, if you're not English, it's coming from the EU.
Yeah.
In the United States, we have a much more subtle way of doing it.
Right.
And I think it's fascinating that even though there was coordination in the past, and the federal courts have enjoined the federal government from currently doing it,
For the most part.
the fact is, everybody in big tech knows what you're allowed to see and what you're allowed to hear. And so they can just apply that censorship themselves, whether at the direct behest of the government, which obviously would be unconstitutional, or just with an unspoken wink and a nod.
Right.
So if you want to do a Google
preference cascade, as it were.
Yeah. So if you want to do a Google News search on Kamala Harris's proposal, assuming that it is her proposal and that it's real, okay, good luck with that. We're just not going to show it to you. Now,
Right.
That's not an accident. That's not a mistake.
Well, this is nothing new. I mean, I remember it's not that long ago in 2020 when the Hunter Biden story broke about his computer, and that got falsely labeled as Russian propaganda. It was banned from Twitter and Facebook. Did I say Washington? New York Post article. I mean, this is not something that is brand new. This has been going on for quite some time.
It's just getting a little more obvious now.
They're not trying to hide it as much as they used to. That's for sure.
And it really bothers me. This entire past week looking at the DNC really bothers me. They said almost nothing at the DNC about policy. They talked.
I don't remember them saying anything about policy.
They
Trump
talked
bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad, joy.
Yeah, 300 Trump bad mentions. I think there were 6 mentions, something like that, 6 or 8 mentions of tax policy, a couple of mentions of spending, and 297 mentions, some derogatory mention of Trump. It wasn't a policy convention. See,
No.
it was a joy convention. You see,
Right.
It was all about joy, which, by the way,
Yeah, that word got around journalists real quick.
yeah, I think we've got DNC Democrats were joyful. What a contrast to Florida men Trump and DeSantis. Kamala Harris joy to, well, this is Fox News. Kamala Harris joy to the world shtick is done. RFK tries to spoil Kamala Harris's moment of joy by pulling out. You can read that however
Phrasing.
Are we still doing phrasing? So why Kamala Harris's politics of joy is the best way to fight fascism. You have no idea what fascism is, but again, it's everybody got the message. It was joy. Again, you think you live in a free country with a free press, but it's interesting that the free press has not particularly minded, apparently, that Kamala Harris has not, since her selection, her undemocratic selection, I would point out, has not held a single
0 votes.
Has not held a single interview or a single press conference. Has appeared nowhere in any sort of unscripted venue. And this is fine.
She has never received a single vote, primary vote, in 2 tries, and yet she's the nominee.
It was Bill Hicks back in the 90s who basically had a whole thing about how we live in a meaningless fiction of democracy.
Yeah.
And it seemed like comedy back then. But if you go back and look at Bill Hicks's routines from 1989, 1991, they're a hell of a lot less funny now. Because he seems to be describing the world in which we live. We have a regime media that simply parrots what they know the regime wants to hear. And that narrative, and it's a narrative, by the way, that's repeated in education and basically every other, social institution that we have. Democrats good, Republicans bad.
Yeah. Russell Brand kind of picked up that thread at least a decade ago, probably a little bit longer. So is Joe Rogan. Even Bill Maher will run wild with that thread. It's become so obvious. It's been obvious to people on the right for a pretty long time. But even though the leftish-ish people are, see it, and they're disturbed by it, which they should be. I mean, old school lefties, the lefties of the 60s and 70s, would have been appalled.
Yeah, well, let's share. It reminds me, this happened this past
God, that
week.
was hilarious.
And I think I have volume flowing through, so we should be able to hear this.
Hey everybody, welcome back.
Oh, this is 7 minutes and 16 seconds.
And please welcome your own
I don't
show.
want to see the
Delegations. It was no. That's the truth.
That's the truth.
Oh, well,
The
shoot.
Helicopter of Marine One
Chopper
in the
talk.
background.
Okay, I don't want to watch the whole 7 minutes there. The one video I pick is the
Yes,
the
that's
entire
it.
the entire thing. How about 35 seconds of this?
Vice President Harris. He knew his attack lines on President Biden. He really has struggled with how to go after someone who's 20 years younger than him, who is a different gender, a different race. It's kind of been this moment where he has not been able to coalesce around a single attack line.
I know you guys are objective over there, that you just report the news as it is. Oh, I know. CNN makes I know
That's supposed to be a laugh line?
I wasn't supposed to be, but
Yeah, but it is. That's the thing. Well, we know you're supposed to be objective over there at CNN. Everybody breaks out into laughter in the audience because ultimately people know the truth. We do not
there's
have
a reason
free
that,
and independent media.
Yeah, there's a reason the media is losing market share to independent reporters. People like Barry Weiss and Matt Singal and Matt Taibbi. There's a bunch of them. And none of those are righty people. I mean, most of them you would consider more center left, the reasonable left, the JF Kennedy left, the Scoop Jackson left. They're the people who are looking out for America, want its best interest, but have different ideas as to how to get there. That's fine. That you can have a discussion with them. They'll listen. May not be convinced, but you can actually have a discussion with them. The rest of what the media is made up of is just absolute power mad, power hungry lefties that don't care anything for America. Actually, they kind of hate America. They certainly hate middle America. And anybody who isn't within their social circles, they consider, cavemen, essentially, cavemen and cave women, who don't know, are not sophisticated, don't know anything about the world, and really needed to be guided by the hand by their betters in order to make the right decisions. So we better limit their decisions to just these few things. And that's what goes on with the Google searches. That's what goes on with the censorship. You really shouldn't see that stuff because it might lead you to make the wrong decision. And we already know the decision you should make.
Yes, because we are the smart, pretty people, and we can run your life better than you can. And by the way, that attitude is
stop voting against your interests, Rube.
Yeah, that's been the argument for years. It's now we're I guess 25 years after the publication of What's the Matter with Kansas?
Exactly what I was just thinking of. Yes. Yeah, what's the matter with Kansas?
25 years ago, they were asking, why can't you rubes and hayseeds understand your own interests?
Mm-hmm.
there's never any discussion as to whether they have a different conception of what their own interests might or should be.
Well, and it's the manifestation of a remarkably self-aware moment that the New Yorker had on that cover, showing downtown Manhattan, and then flyover country, and I think California's are like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and then stuff.
Yeah.
After 6th Avenue, it just sort of ends.
Well, it's always fascinating whenever the New York Times or the Washington Post or whoever sends somebody out into middle America to, get a sense of what people are thinking out there. And it's always written in this weird, almost
alien culture,
anthropological style. This isolated community still seems to believe in some supreme being who orders the universe.
It's almost, you almost hear David Attenborough in your head.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's the same kind of coverage. Because if it doesn't happen in LA or New York or Washington, D.C., it can't possibly be
It doesn't
important.
count.
It can't possibly be news, right? And we're simply being fed a narrative at this point. And the only reason that you're being fed a narrative is so that you are easier to control. And
right, it's the myth making that George Soros was pushing back at the turn of the last century, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, about creating a new myth. It's not about feeding people dogma. It's about creating a myth that they can follow. And by myth, same thing as narrative, that people can follow, that they will believe in, and they will act upon because it makes them feel virtuous and good.
And by the way, you don't even have to go, overboard in your fueling of that narrative. All you have to do is just not report certain things that are inconvenient.
Keep it very, very simple. Nothing that would upset the narrative gets reported. Everything that supports the narrative, whether it's true or not, gets reported.
And that way you can build up a narrative and nobody ever sees a countervailing narrative, which, by the way, as you can see from that one clip from Colbert, people are starting to get wise to. Now, that wasn't the entire audience laughing. It was probably, just judging by sound, about half of the audience. I mean, you still have the problem of, well, there's two problems. One is that fully a third or more of people really want to be propagandized.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to think for themselves. It's a lot more comfortable if you can just repeat whatever the mainstream narrative is. Nobody's going to lose their job by repeating something they heard on CBS.
Right.
And for those people, I mean, you're always going to have that, 1/3 of people who are just going to say whatever they hear on TV and they'll repeat that as the truth. And
well, they're a large part of those people are the ones who don't want to have to make decisions about their lives. They want it to be taken care of by somebody else.
Yeah, but I mean, there is something that is a little, the thing that's so pernicious about the way the press operates today. And, we've complained, people on the right in general really have complained for 30 or 40 years now about a left-wing bias in the media. Certainly ever since the post-Vietnam era, there's this complaint about the left-wing bias in the media. And the media has constantly said, no, we're objective. We're putting pitches right over the plate. And, whether you...
Just ask Dan Rather.
Yeah, just ask Dan Rather. I mean, he's convinced to this day that the George W. Bush National Guard thing was, it was fake. The letter was fake. But, I mean, the story was accurate.
There was a real issue there. There was a real story.
Fake but accurate. Well,
Right. Good God.
Not accurate, fake. That's all we have to say. But
Right.
just the level of it, and the thing that's so pernicious about it, like I was about to say earlier, is that it even affects people who are aware of it, simply because this narrative just exists in the public consciousness and is constantly reinforced by nearly everything that you see, nearly everything that the media talks about. And again, I go back to a story I've told here before. Bill Shirer, who was the CBS correspondent in Nazi Germany during the 1930s. Back around 1937, 38, he was able to take a vacation. He took his family from Berlin to Switzerland. And of course, once he got to Switzerland and he saw, real free press at the time in Switzerland, he began to realize that even though he was a CBS correspondent, he had direct access to CBS's actual news feed. He knew what was on the wire for CBS. He knew what the truth was, but he realized that simply living in Berlin in 1937 and being constantly bombarded by the German press on a daily basis, which he read as part of his job as CBS's Berlin correspondent, he realized that he didn't fully realize what was going on in the rest of the world, simply because the narrative had sort of sunk in on a subconscious level. And that's the really pernicious thing about it. If it's in the water, if it's in the air, you can't help but drink and breathe it.
Is that the same Shirer that wrote The Rise and Fall of Hitler?
Yeah, he did write The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Yes.
That's still one of the best researched and written books about that time, and Hitler in particular. Colleges have been using that book for probably 40, 50 years.
Yes. Well, also, Shirer was able to do that from a unique perspective in that he had lived in Berlin from 1933 to 1940, and he, went back. And of course, at the end, Nazi Germany fell so quickly that we largely captured their entire government archives.
They were good about keeping records.
Yeah. One thing you got to say about the Germans. They kept up on their paperwork right up to the end. And so, he was able, with the perspective, of having lived there and personally seen many of the things that went on during the Third Reich, and then being able to come back and see the actual German government archives and being able to quote from them extensively, he had he was uniquely suited to write The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. His other book, which is equally good, is Berlin Diary, which is basically the story of his life in Berlin as CBS correspondent. I think he got to Berlin just days before Adolf Hitler was nominated and selected as chancellor by President Hindenburg, and he was there until after the start of the European phase, anyway, of World War II. So, he personally witnessed many of the events, and being able to go back and now look at the official records of the events that he witnessed gave him an interesting perspective. Yes, he was a big lefty, and he really didn't like the Nazis, but I think when you're reading a history of the Third Reich, you probably don't want to read a history from someone who liked the Nazis. You wanted a little different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is a invaluable resource. It's a great book.
Yeah, it is a monumental work. The fact that it is, a couple of thousand pages long, and he goes through 1939 to 1945 or 1933 to 1945 on at sometimes minute by minute basis.
Yeah, it's true.
Does get a little tedious in places, but yeah, it is a monumental work of history. But we're kind of living through something similar. We don't have Joseph Goebbels. We don't have a ministry of propaganda, but we certainly do have a gentleman's understanding that the narrative of, in this country, the Democratic Party, or in the UK, the narrative of the Labour Party, that is the one sole and legitimate narrative.
Right.
And
yeah, it's the narrative of the ruling class, the political class, and they decide what you can know and what you can't know, what you can talk about and what you can't talk about.
And beyond that, since we are a democracy, it becomes very important that we have a transparent system to determine what the people want. And this past week, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, decided that maybe illegal immigrants shouldn't vote. 5-4.
Yeah, I have not read that decision. I don't know if you have. I do want to read Amy Barrett Cohen's dissent. I for the life of me, I can't understand. I assume it's something technical, but I just, it makes no sense to me that you can't demand that people at least swear or prove that they are American citizens. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I can't think of a single constitutional argument against it.
Here in California, when you go vote, you go in and you tell them, your address and your name, and they look it up in a register, and you have to sign this register. And then before they'll give you their ballot, there is this separate affidavit that you have to sign and date that says, yes, I am who I say I am. They won't give you your ballot until you sign it. And then there's a second piece of paper that you turn in with your ballot that declares that this is me and this is my actual ballot. And I declare that it was in my hand, nobody else touched it, and I gave it to the election worker. And they have all of this paperwork that you sign. You've got the register, you've got your affidavit, you've got your ballot. This is really me affidavit that you sign. But they'll never ask you for your driver's license. Never ask you for an ID.
That's the thing.
Never ask you to show, hey, well, do you have an electric bill that just has your name and address on it? Right. No. In fact, if you ask, because I did this, not this past election, but the one before that, I asked, don't you need my ID to prove who I am? Oh, no. We don't need to
can't ask you that.
We don't need to go there. And the funny thing is, 15 years ago, 20 years ago in California, they did ask for your ID. You went in, you showed them your driver's license before they
even
let you
in
sign
Virginia,
the
we still have to show our driver's license. Even in liberal Fairfax County, we have to show our driver's license.
Not in California. And here's the other thing: we now give driver's licenses in California to illegal immigrants.
Everybody, right?
Yeah, everybody. Anybody who needs a driver's license can get one.
Matter of fact, Dale, you're going to get to start paying for illegal immigrants down payments.
Yeah. So, everybody gets a driver's license because Lord knows you can't have unlicensed drivers driving on the streets. Oh, by the way, if you get a driver's license in California, you're automatically registered to vote. Yeah, just a cool little
motor
thing.
Voter law.
Yeah, just to make things a little more convenient for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and in places like D.C. and New York, among others, illegals can register to vote in local elections, but only local.
Sure.
As if I don't know how they divide that out. I really don't. And I have quite a bit of doubt that they do divide it out.
Yeah, but here's the thing: if you can expand early voting, you have no ID requirement. You can expand mail-in voting to everyone at any time.
It's like Oregon and Colorado mail a ballot to every registered voter.
Sure. Well,
alive, dead, legal, illegal, it doesn't matter.
It certainly makes it less necessary once those ballots come in to get up to any sort of sneaky business at the counting center that might look suspicious.
Well,
If
and the problem is once the votes are counted, there's not much you can do after that.
Yeah, exactly. So if you really want to throw an election, what you do is you determine who's actually going to have access to the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know who's going to have access to the ballot, you know how little incentive you need to actually cheat at the counting center.
And on top of that, one policy, it's really Joe Biden's policy at this point, but it's been Democrat policy for a while, and it certainly can be fairly imputed to Kamala Harris, is this American Citizenship Act or something, which is basically mass amnesty of everybody who's been let into the country over the past 3.5 years.
Sure, and why wouldn't you do that? You know they're coming from
Because
largely
we've been
left.
saying, how long we've been saying that this is a voter replacement plan. I mean,
That's
what it is.
that's a conspiracy theory, my friend.
Right.
I've been assured that the voter replacement theory is just a bunch of hooey.
Yeah, even though Rui Tejera wrote about it back in like 2003 or something.
He wrote a whole book about how that was going to work. Sure, you think you live in a free country where you have a say in how things go, but the political and media class have done everything that they can to ensure that you don't have any such say.
Yeah. I mean, just look at the fact that Kamala Harris is the nominee. 14 million people voted for Joe Biden. Not one voted for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, but see, she was on the ticket with him, so therefore it counts. You see, it's just magical transference from Joe to her. And by the way,
it's mathematically sound.
If you let Donald Trump get in, democracy will be in danger. So you've got to, much like
there's things you got to do.
Much like, Cy Hirsch's line from his Vietnam War reporting, we had to destroy the village in order to save it.
To save it, right, yeah.
And so, we don't need that. Democracy is important for the public pomp and circumstance. It's not really important. It's not important for determining who actually runs things.
Right. That is how the political class look at it. It's a necessary
evil
parade. It's not something that actually has any consequence.
It's a necessary evil. The rubes and hayseeds have to think that they have some sort of say in what goes on.
Whereas the rest of us think government's a necessary evil. And that's why we have a constitution that restricts the government. And every state constitution restricts its state government as well. So,
yes. Restrictions that are increasingly more honored, as Shakespeare said, in the breach than the observance.
The observance, yeah.
Once the federal government is starting to have regular meetings, and by the way, it's more pernicious than that. Sure, it's a bad thing if the federal government is having regular meetings with social media companies to tell them what they need to censor and what they don't need to censor. But there is a backdoor route about that because there's this whole disinformation movement where there are these NGOs that have governments on one side and social media on the other. The governments just go to the NGO and say, hey, we don't like this. That automatically becomes something the NGO raises with the social media companies who, in most cases, supinely comply with whatever this NGO has said. And there's one major one. I forget the name of it. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, but they just took a big hit. I know it's like the World Governing Foundation or something. I know who you're talking about. And they act like they're basically underwriter laboratories, which for those who don't know, if you want to have your electronic device certified as safe and useful, you go to underwriter laboratories and have them evaluate it. They give you a score. And then if they score you high enough, you get to put the UL symbol on there. And otherwise, you don't have it, and caveat emptor.
The problem is that unlike Underwriter Laboratory, who do have a transparent and relatively open testing program that you can see and critique, these NGOs are deciding what is true and what is disinformation.
And they're funded by interested parties.
Yeah, or misinformation. And of course, the public reasoning behind all this is, well, you need to be protected by these lies and frauds that you might believe something that is not true, which could be, dangerous. And you have to be protected from the disinformation and misinformation, and occasionally even factually true things that are inconvenient, because were you to believe those things, you might, think something racist.
Kamala Harris was the border czar.
Or why would you think that?
Right, or that she was against fracking, or that she funded, or at least helped to fund bail money for violent protesters in Minneapolis. I mean, you don't need to know that.
But the problem is that once you believe that you need to be protected from misinformation or disinformation, it becomes attractive to think, well, maybe there is some trustworthy organization that can offer me this protection. But the truth is that no organization, no group of people, no single person can ever be trusted to tell you what is true and what is not true. Because there's not a single person or organization that will not be influenced ultimately by some ideological belief that they hold that they refuse to accept is wrong.
That's right. I mean, that's really the core of public choice theory. Buchanan, who won a Nobel Prize, the Nobel in Economics Prize back in the 90s, I believe. I think it was like mid 90s, early 90s.
Yeah, public choice theory.
Yeah, and that is the core of it, that everybody is self-interested. You don't become like, some magically neutral person just because you get hired into the government. You still have your own peccadillos, your own biases, your own thoughts and feelings, and those are going to play part in how you decide what's good, what's bad, what's true, what's not true, whatever.
Yeah, so this guy being arrested, Pavel Durov being arrested in France, should tell you how invested governments are in ensuring that you have no communication that is beyond their purview. And that is extraordinarily dangerous. And I'm disappointed that so many people are so willing to accept that the government has a legitimate interest in all of my private conversations.
Well, how many people do you still see wearing masks? Quite a few where I am.
Yeah, it's weird. You see Taylor Lorenz, Washington Post, reporter, who anytime she goes up to something where there's a whole bunch of people there, she's always in a mask.
Mm-hmm. And complaining about all the ones who aren't wearing masks.
Yeah, look, it's 2024. COVID is endemic. Whatever we were supposed to accomplish by shutting down the economy for months at a time, it didn't work.
Right. Matter of fact, the statistics show that there's almost zero difference between economies that were shut down and kept shut down and those that opened early.
Yes, and then we get into the science on masks and how reliable they are.
Right, that still makes no sense to me. Put on a mask. If the mask works, then you're protected. And look, it doesn't matter if I have a mask on or not.
Well, yeah, that's true. But as we talked about, I think probably 5 or 6 months ago, the FDA ran a study on the efficacy of masks. It came back that, they're not efficacious at all. There may be some benefit if you have a tightly fitted N97 mask
95, yeah.
Or N95, yeah. Maybe, but a surgical mask or anything else, no benefit whatsoever. And
a bandana?
Yeah. And the first thing the FDA said is, well, that's a bunch of bullshit. And they just tossed the report.
The thing is, they had already done this. They knew this years and years and years ago. And the biggest problem is not so much that whether or not masks work. N95 masks are effective, but only if you wear them correctly. And if you fumble with them all the time, taking them on and off, you're not, it doesn't work. It does not do a damn bit of good.
No, it doesn't. And again, the level to which people are willing to wordlessly comply, and look, sometimes you have to. For example, out here in California, for a little bit, you could simply not go into a grocery store and buy food without having a face covering on. However, that was the word. You must have a face covering.
Do you just wear your motorcycle helmet?
Yeah, bandana, fine. You know, a little neck gaiter, made out of polyester. Yeah, fine. As long as your face was covered. And they were actually selling, I saw these at the dollar store, and I thought they were hilarious. They were face coverings, but they were mesh face coverings. So you could
That's almost as bad as Alyssa Milano and the rose shade.
Yeah, you could buy a mesh face covering, walk into a store, and nobody would say boo to you because you were wearing the required face covering. And of course, even though it was mesh and it had nothing, no worth at all, they would still let you in.
No,
it was insane.
As we called it at the time, it was a shibboleth. It was nothing more than
it's a talisman.
A talisman.
That's it.
I mean, it's just it was a signal. I'm doing the right thing. I care.
I'm wearing my talisman of compliance. Therefore, you have to let me in. And it worked. In any event, moving off of that, let's talk about Kamala Harris's actual policies, to the extent that we know what they are.
That would be a short conversation,
because it's interesting how her policies. And by the way, I forgot to do this earlier, which I was going to do. So let me find her website. I'm sure it'll come up in Google real quick. The Kamala Harris website.
Actually, you could put in Trump and it'll come up in Harris website.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on. Now that we know it's
now you need to know.
Now that we know it's Kamala Harris thing, if I just search for Donald Trump. Let's just search for Donald Trump. What do I get with Donald Trump? Okay, well, that's not too bad.
Oh, so they finally changed it. All right, good.
Donald Trump website? No, we do. So, well, at least Google isn't doing that. Anyway, let's go back.
Well, they were, but they've apparently gotten worked over.
Let's go back to the Kamala Harris website. Of course, the very first thing they need is money. Donate for your chance to meet Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. I can't think of an incentive that is less likely to make me give them money than that. So let's see. Meet Kamala Harris. Okay. Well, there we go. That's a thing about her. Meet Tim Walz. Well, there's a thing about him. Okay. Take action. Oh, okay. Well, I just need to volunteer. Store. Great. We have a Kamala Harris store. That's good. Where's the rest of it?
What's this campaign about?
Yeah, what are we running to do? What do we think? What is it that we believe? Well, we're not gonna find it here. And in the mainstream media, whenever a policy is, and I even hesitate to use the word announced. let's use the word floated. And you read the report, it's always, well, my cousin's boyfriend, his uncle was at the DNC and he met a congressman who says that Kamala Harris wants to do X. It's literally the announcement of policy, the floating of policy via an elaborate game of Telegram. Because we have
the whisper campaign, yeah.
Yeah, we have no idea what she believes. Now, we can go back and see videos of her saying things like, well, if I was president, I'd just take all your guns away, go screw. Or if, I'd have a mandatory buyback. And if I was president, I would just ban fracking completely. Okay, well, we have her on video saying that. She still believe that? Well, my boyfriend's brother talked to a state senator who knows the head of the Kamala Harris campaign who says she doesn't believe that anymore.
Oh, well, that's solid authority.
Okay, great. So she doesn't believe all the things that we have her on video saying in 2019.
And none of which she has disavowed.
Yeah, none of which she's disavowed. Well, maybe she has. We don't know because...
Yeah, exactly. She hasn't told anybody who cares to share that with us.
Yeah, and we're certainly not going to get it off her website because there are no policy positions on this website. And that's KamalaHarris.com. That is her main website. It basically has a page to buy stuff, a page to donate, a page to volunteer, and then 2 pages of bios. And that's it. So what does she believe? Well, if we treat the policy flotation announcements that we have received, she wants a 45% tax on capital gains, which in and of itself is insane. Even the Europeans, who are giddy with delight at any new tax that they can levy, even in Europe, they've said, hey, you know what? Taxes on capital gains are probably not a great idea if we want the economy to grow.
Yeah, because they actually need investment.
Yeah, so they've cut their capital gains taxes precisely for the reason that they are counterproductive.
They also tax everybody.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing. Nobody escapes taxation in the EU, ever. Not only do they tax income, they have a national VAT in almost every European country. So everything that you buy, even if you had no income whatsoever, you still have to pay the VAT, which generally runs between 18 and 22%, depending on the country you're in. So everybody is taxed. And if you do have any income, they have a far less progressive taxation system than we have. But everybody participates. And look, that's probably why their social welfare systems are so popular, because everybody has to buy in. The minimum tax you can get away with in Europe is 40%, which they conveniently just withhold from your paycheck automatically.
Yeah.
And the average person pays 50%. If you're rich, you're 60%. There's no deductions. There's no state and local tax exemption. There's no housing mortgage deduction. It's how much did you make? Did you send us 50% of it? If so, we're good. If not, pony up. You still owe us. And because everybody participates in that taxation system, everybody feels comfortable participating in the social welfare system. You cannot have a social welfare system with the American version of taxation, where the top 10% of taxpayers pay 87% of all tax revenues. You simply can't do it. You can't have 90% of the taxpayers get all of the benefits while only paying 13% of the costs.
And that's just at the federal level.
And then when you throw in, well, we've got 2 proposals, one of which is a 45% capital gains tax rate. We've never had a tax rate that high on capital gains, but that's what they want to have. So
it would kill investment in the United States.
Sure. And depending on how far down the income tree that goes, it may kill. See, my fear is that in America, we're not much of a saving nation in terms of putting a lot of money into savings accounts. That's not what we do.
Don't have much choice, but yes.
Well, but I mean, we've never done that. America has always been a real estate investing nation.
True.
Where for the average person, the vast majority of your personal wealth is tied up in your home.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea being is that you get your home when you're young, you get a home in which you can raise a family. Once that family goes and you begin to get older and you decide that you need to downsize, you have this nest egg in the guise of a real physical asset, not money,
Right.
but a real physical asset whose value tends to appreciate over time so that you can cash out of that asset and then have, I guess in today's terms, $500,000-$600,000 that you have as a retirement nest egg that you can now annuitize and have as a source of income. So
Right.
Europeans don't really have that because the rate of home ownership in Europe is much lower than in the United States. Europe is very much a rental type of economy. So we do.
And so, I mean, is the rest of the world, I mean,
Yeah,
for
so-
the most part.
So, they have, like the Japanese, they have this fantastic savings rate. Yeah, well, they don't have much of a choice because
Right.
of the way that their economy is structured. So they have to save cash. And they have to be able to put it into some sort of appreciating investment in order to grow value over the years. America has always been the opposite of that. We don't save cash. We invest in real estate.
Right.
And the way that we fund our retirement is with that real estate investment, which is largely our home. It's not to say you have to sell your home. We do have Social Security. We have other retirement programs, so you may be able to stay in your home as an older person. But if you can't and you do have to sell it, you have a pretty valuable asset that will fund years of retirement income. So
Provided it's not 2008 or 2009.
yeah, and provided that when you sell that house, so let's say you bought a house 30 years ago for $200,000, and that house on Zillow now you can probably sell for $800,000. Okay, great. So now you've made $600,000 off of that house, but not so fast, because now you owe 45% of that $600,000 to the government.
Well, no, that's not true. There is, you have a lifetime exemption for an occupied home, so that there is a break there. But again, that's government granted, and that could change at any time.
I would point you to the income tax, which, when implemented, was only supposed to touch the top 2% of American taxpayers.
And it did when it was implemented.
In 1917, therefore,
Right.
it only touched the top 2% of income earners.
And it was a postcard.
And it had a maximum tax rate of 7%. That was 1917. Let's run the Wayback Machine forward 25 years when there is a 90% tax bracket and the average American in a notional tax was in the, it's not notional, marginal. Their marginal tax rate was theoretically by law somewhere around 25% of their income.
Right.
Okay, so that was from 1917. Well, we don't have to go too far. 17, 27, 37, 41. So by 42. So by 1942, we had a 90% tax bracket, and everybody had to pay income tax from all incomes derived. So sure, currently there is now a exemption for a single family home if you have only one. Yeah, great. That's not written in stone. That's not the law passed. That's not the law passed down by the ancients. That's what the government has decided to let you keep now.
Right.
And if you're going to raise you have no guarantee. That's why I said earlier, it depends on how far down the income tree we decide to go on this. If it starts to affect you in that way, then you can't really depend on your house to fund your retirement, because half of it
those
goes
gains
to the government.
Can be stolen at any time by the government. And I do mean stolen.
And the same thing goes with this galactically stupid proposal to tax unearned income. Now, here's the first thing. How does that work more than once? It doesn't. That's well, see, here's the thing. But the way that they're couching it, as far as I can understand the proposal, to the extent we can even know what the proposal is, since the candidate has made no statement whatsoever about it, is that, well, it's only going to affect people who have more than $10 million a year, and it's only going to be imposed when they die. And so,
on top of all the death tax?
Yeah. So it's nothing you need to worry your pretty little head about.
Yeah, right. That's like Kathy Hochul saying, oh, you real estate developers, you don't have to worry about this Trump trial. It's never going to happen to you, as long as you don't run as a Republican.
Yeah, exactly. So, the government, it always starts off as something that sounds reasonable. But I go back to Walter Williams, the economist at George Mason University up in your neck of the woods in Virginia, who said years ago,
literally right over there,
and it is absolutely true. Once you agree in principle that the government has a claim on any portion of your income, you have agreed in principle that they have a claim on all of it.
That's correct.
And
I mean, and that's not limited to just taxation. That's any good transactional attorney will tell you, look, if we give up this, it seems like it's limited, but it's not. Unless you explicitly limit it, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of trouble that you can't even anticipate. I can't anticipate. All I know is it's trouble beyond this line because of this phrasing. And that's exactly what we have with tax policy. Which,
by the way, whenever the Income Tax Act was passed, after they managed to get the 16th Amendment approved so that they could actually levy an income tax, there was an argument in Congress about, well, should we throw in a maximum income? This is the most that can ever be. Even if there's, like a war or something, we can never make it more than this. And the counter argument was no. I mean, if you put a limit on it, then the government will just automatically run everything straight up to that limit. Well,
I mean, okay, yes, that's true.
And conversely, if you don't put a limit on it,
right,
25 years later, you'll have a 90% tax bracket.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And that's true for all of these tax proposals. And then when you get to this tax on unearned income, okay, sure. For now, it's people who make more than $10 million a year, and it's only levied after they die, in addition, of course, to the inheritance taxes, which means that if I wanted to pass my stock portfolio along to my children when I died, and I had a nice stock portfolio that had been growing for several years, the first thing that my kids would have to do is sell a substantial portion of that stock portfolio to pay the taxes that are due on income I've never received and that they have never received.
Yep.
It's no different.
It's almost like when you win a car at The Price is Right. Until you pay the taxes on that car, you don't actually get the car.
And it's like, again, to go back to the home ownership analogy, imagine you bought a home in 2000 and 25 years later in 2025 you bought it for $200,000, and 25 years later the price is now $800,000. So you've had a $600,000 increase in the price of the house. Now, That's
Nominally, yes.
Yeah, but nominally. That's not money in your pocket, obviously. That's just the value of your house. Now imagine the government coming in and saying, well, you have unearned income of $600,000. And there's a 25% tax on unearned income. So you now owe us a check for 25% of $600,000. So we'll expect our 140.
No, 200.
What, for
No,
600,000?
you're right. 175.
A 20% tax would be 120,000. So
150. No, 150. Yeah, it'd be 150.
So it'd be around. So a 25% tax would be around 150,000. So that'd be like the government saying, "Hey, sure, you're enjoying your home. You've been living there for 25 years, and you've made $600,000 of it, and you don't have that money in your pocket, obviously, but we're going to need 150 grand from you for taxes."
Yeah. Oh, was business bad? Fuck you, pay me.
Yeah. Again, good fellas. So your business caught on fire. Fuck you, pay me. And so what do? Well, obviously, you don't have $150,000 because, again, as we just mentioned, we are not a saving nation. We're a real estate investing nation. And the government has just come in and said, you owe us for your real estate investment, which I'm now going to have to get rid of. I'm going to have to sell that house because there's no way that I can pay that $120,000 tax from the money that I have.
Out of pocket. Yeah. I mean, I have to sell assets in order to come up with that money.
Exactly. And the one asset I have that would cover that cost, it's certainly not going to be my car. It's
right.
Going to be the home. And so that unearned tax.
But you have a Model T that's in perfect condition.
Yeah, that you're going to lose your home. And if same thing, now let's put that into the stock market terms. And I don't know how, if that goes beyond the one-time payment at my death, which is bad enough, by the way. But if that ever becomes a real thing, a tax on unearned income, you'll destroy investment.
Yes. That's exactly what would happen. Because why would you invest if you know that no matter what, you're going to end up having to pay more? Because you're not only paying on the unrealized gains, which you already do. We do pay on unrealized gains to a certain extent. That already does happen. It's fairly small, but it does happen. You're also going to have to pay regular income tax on what's ever left over, right? And your ROI is going to drop precipitously to the point where you may not make any money. You may even lose money on an investment. That makes no sense. See,
the problem is not that it will kill investment. It will, but people are going to need to put their money somewhere. Okay, nobody has a Scrooge McDuck money vault where they dive headlong into their piles.
Well, what they do, Dale, they'll go to solid assets, to personal property, gems, art. I mean, this is what the oppressed peoples around the world have done in order to protect their wealth. Was they put it all into things that could be taken with them and sold as needed to be, but they held value. So whether it's
diamonds,
jewelry,
gold,
or
silver,
right, all that stuff, art, rugs. I mean, it doesn't matter as long as it's portable and it retains value. It's an investment that you can't judge what the increase in value is until you actually sell it. So that would be what most, well, I don't know if most, but certainly a lot of people people with at least some financial sense would start to do.
Sure.
Is
And
we go back to the old world style.
yeah, I was about to say, and if you
investment.
want to, and I was about to say, if you want to live in a 14th century economy,
Right.
that's a good way to get you there. The problem is with a fiat currency, you're always going to have inflation.
Right.
And therefore, you need a rate of return on your money that at least keeps pace with inflation and hopefully beats it.
Plus,
Plus, you need to get paid for the amount of time that you spend where that money is unavailable to you,
right.
whether it's in the stock market or whatever. And so you're going to need a yield that is, in percentage points above whatever the rate of inflation is.
And nominal inflation is somewhere between 2% and 3%, right? So,
Unless you're talking about the last 4 years, sure.
well, I'm just talking. It used to be between like 1.5%, 2.5%, something like that. But assuming that that's 2.5%, you go to the highest, right, to be conservative. If you assume that 2.5% is that's the inflation rate, that's the value of your money, then if you're not making at least 7-8%, then you're kind of floating. You're treading water.
Exactly. And then if the government comes in and says, okay, well, of that yield that you're getting, we're going to want a quarter of it back.
Right.
You've now just
Then-
increased that yield by 25%. So you're 4 percentage
There's
points.
the fees for when you sell those assets,
Yeah.
all the
So,
transaction fees.
so now what do? I mean, you're going to have investment misallocation based on that property or based on
Right.
that government
And people will not
policy.
hold on to investments, right? Why would you hold on to the investment? And you take the cash out, pay whatever the penalty is, but at least you have the cash. And you're going to put it into personal property.
Yeah, you don't have any choice because you can't even go into like bonds.
No, that's even worse.
Yeah, so the stock market would then just be, well, you'd never have to look for the Dow Jones Industrial Average because you would always know what it was. Today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was unchanged.
Right. Yeah, it would just cease to exist. It would only be institutional investors who would seek to protect their customers, but how much can they really do? Oh, well, what they would do is they'd lobby for some sort of exemption.
Yeah.
Well, yes, that would be the law, except if you're in a money market account with T. Rowe Price, or you're in a
yeah, exactly.
in whatever kind of account with Goldman Sachs.
Because you then begin to politically game it, and it ends up like the IRS code already is, 1,000 pages of obscure regulations. And they're set up so that even the IRS can't answer your questions if you have a particularly thorny tax question. And if you get it wrong, it's never the IRS's fault.
I love those comedians that go out there and be like, well, the IRS, sends me this form and then I'm supposed to fill out. And I'm like, is this right? And they're like, no, you're so close, but sorry, we're going to have to fine you $10,000.
Yeah, and it's
you knew the fucking number. Just tell me the fucking number.
Yeah, and it's really irksome that you can call the IRS and say, okay, I'm going to declare this and this, and I'm going to deduct this and that. Is that okay? I don't know. Try it. See what happens.
I can't give you advice.
Yeah, I'm not a tax attorney. And by the way, your tax attorney may not be able to give you the right advice either because the code is impenetrable. And adding on to what is already a disastrous system of income taxation by taxing unearned income,
right?
We do have a historical example. Norway decided that they were going to do the same thing, and they were going to charge the millionaires a tax on unearned income. They estimated that it would increase Norway's government revenues by about 150 billion per year, which seemed like, or 150 million per year. It's Norway, not billion, million.
Right. Yeah. Million.
So 150 million a year in a country the size of Norway. That's a sizable revenue increase for a country.
And it's like what,
Norway's
25, 30 million?
Yeah, it's not a big country. Okay, great. They implemented it. What happened was that all of the people for whom that tax would apply simply pulled out of all of their investments in Norway, went elsewhere, and Norway ended up losing 600 million kroner a year. And that tax proposal, after I think 2.5 or 3 years, was relegated to the ash heap of history. Because
this is not working.
Yeah, that is, if you've never seen the HBO series Veep, you have to watch it. One of the recurring characters is the Prime Minister of Norway, who is a complete bitch. But anyway, so that Norway experienced the perfectly predictable consequences of that sort of policy. And now we want to implement it here. You know, it's the same old thing about socialism. Well, it didn't work when they did it because they're a bunch of morons. When I implement socialism, it'll work fine.
It's so true. I mean, it's like, how do we keep falling for this over and over again? This is Lucy and the football. It's just like, no, it doesn't work. We have historical examples of why it doesn't work and why it cannot work.
And yet, here we are with the same old policy. So I just don't, you know, it's I think Chris had an example of this with one of her acquaintances on social media, and they're very much an anti-Trump person. And so Chris just pointed out, well, this would do that and that and that. And their response was, well, I'm just going to do everything I can to ensure Trump loses. But wait, that's not the problem. The problem is this thing. But I don't want to hear it. It's far more important to me than Trump loses than any of this boring policy shit, which I think is probably, you know, a large proportion of the electorate as well. You know, they're not...
Well, no, you're not wrong about that. I mean, look, I know plenty of fairly conservative, rightist type people who are like, I don't know if I can vote for Trump. And you know, and I don't push them. I don't really say anything. I mean, in one sense, I can really understand. I can empathize. But, and I don't say this to them because I don't want to upset them, but I don't see how you really have a choice. Am I a big fan of Trump? No, not at all. I've never liked him. He has grown on me somewhat. I certainly believe that he believes in America and that he fights for America. I absolutely believe that. I thought his 4 years, policy-wise, were mostly good. He didn't do shit about the government finances. As a matter of fact,
did the opposite.
Worsened them. Yeah. And I was not happy about that. But foreign policy-wise, repealing regulations, you know, opening or closing down the borders, these were, you know, real things that happened that really helped the country quite a bit. We saw manufacturing rise, and not just in building, you know, chips or solar panels, which is what this whole Inflation Reduction Act is really aimed at.
Yeah.
We actually saw real manufacturing jobs come back to this country. Tariffs did hurt us. That's true, but they also helped us. And quite frankly, until he started doing that, and I was railing against it, I didn't realize how many tariffs we were facing. And there is, I think, a certain logic in, look, you're a friendly nation. Why are you charging us tariffs? If you're going to do that, then guess what our tariffs are going to be?
Our tariffs are going to mirror yours.
Shit.
There we go.
Right. And I think there's a certain sense to that.
We don't have time to get into an extended discussion of tariffs, so I'm going to elide past all that.
I agree.
I think it's much more complicated than the traditional libertarian concept of tariffs and free
It
trade
is. And when we talked about it, we brought that up.
Yeah.
So,
but let's elide past that. You are basically making a transactional case for Trump.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I would make a principled case for Trump. Despite January 6th and all of the craziness around that, what I do know is that when Donald Trump was president, whenever some rando federal judge in Hawaii said, you can't have this executive order, he complied. Whenever people came at him and said, well, you need to do this by executive order, there were a couple of times when Trump said, well, Congress has to do that. I can't do that by executive order. Despite his bombast and his narcissism, when it came to the principles of government or governance, when push came to shove, in every case that I can think of, and we can argue about January 6th, but let's put that aside. In every other case I can think of during his 4 years, Donald Trump submitted to what he thought the constitutional requirements and limits of the president's office was.
True.
And so all this talk about how, well, Donald Trump will destroy democracy, well, then why isn't he president right now?
Right. Exactly.
Why did he leave? And whenever that, those federal judges in Hawaii, it's always the Ninth Circuit and very often Hawaii, when they said, well, you can't prevent immigrants from just coming willy-nilly across the border, why did he comply? Why didn't he just have that judge rounded up, tossed in prison, and close the border himself?
We could have sued him with criminal law, some made-up version.
Yeah, I mean...
that seems to be the MO of the current administration.
So from my point of view, from a philosophical point of view, he has showed during his 4 years, way more fidelity to the Constitution and to the limits of executive power specified therein than Joe Biden did with his attempt to have a nationwide vaccination mandate, or with his attempts to forgive student loans without any sort of statutory authority to do either of those things at all. He just decided that was what the policy should be, and I can do that by executive order. No, you can't. And he did everything he could to impose them. And when the Supreme Court came to him and said, no, you can't do that with student loans, he said, okay, well, I'll find another way and do it anyway. So, all this talk about Donald Trump being an authoritarian, it's funny that this authoritarian, every time that he faced a roadblock imposed on him by the constitutional limits to the executive branch's authority, complied with those limits.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's...
And really more so than any president since George Herbert Walker Bush.
Yes, which, by the way, we commented on at the time.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember one podcast where we were talking about how, he, instead of doing this by executive order, he just came out and said that the president doesn't have that power. Congress has to decide about this. That's a congressional issue. I haven't heard a president say that since ever. So,
well, we heard Obama say that and then changed his mind and decided it was, oh, actually, I got a phone and a pen. I can go ahead and do whatever I want.
Actually, I don't care about what Congress says. So with that in mind, and considering that we've been here for an hour and a half, so we've got to shut this thing down in just a couple of minutes, just a quick overview of I think where we are. So looking at Real Clear Politics, and this is the national, and there's an interesting dichotomy here that we'll look at. This is the national polling, and this is the RCP average of the national polling. the reason that I bring it up is because RCP, their poll average has been pretty spot on for every election cycle since 2004, I think. So that doesn't look good. Harris at 48.4, Trump at 46.9. Oh, something went wrong. Wow, something really went wrong. Boy, that's a hell of an error. So here we are, Harris up 1.5 in the polling. And we can actually see how that crossover has occurred just over the last, well, I guess we can't just go with 30 days anymore, can we? So just over the last 3 months. And we can see how that jump has gone. And she doesn't appear to be losing really any momentum there. And we can, but there is an interesting dichotomy in that if you look at RCP's electoral map, it's still looking like that.
And the two biggest ones there are Pennsylvania and North Carolina.
Yes, either one of those goes and it's over.
Yes. Pennsylvania has been
well,
a bellwether state for how many years?
Actually, he could lose North Carolina and still win.
That's true.
What he can't lose is Pennsylvania.
Right.
Because if he loses Pennsylvania, then he has got to pull either.
Well, he could pick up Michigan, Wisconsin, or Minnesota.
He's never going to pick up Minnesota. That's just never going to happen. Put that out of your mind.
I'm just saying that those are his three potential outs.
Yeah, Michigan maybe, Wisconsin maybe. But again, 19 electoral votes.
Right.
That 19
and
electoral...
Virginia is a lot closer than it seems.
See,
actually, a lot of these states are closer than they seem, other than the obvious ones.
Yeah, that 19 electoral votes puts Trump back at, 268.
Right.
2 votes short. So if you lose those 19, you've got to come up with, well, you got to come up with something.
You got to come up with that, the extra vote in Nebraska, and
Michigan.
Is it New Hampshire that has the other extra vote?
Michigan would do it for him.
Yes.
Virginia would
get him closer.
Virginia would get him to 270.
Would it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if he loses Pennsylvania,
Virginia's only 13.
If he's losing Pennsylvania, he's down at 268. So he needs two electoral
I see
votes.
what you're saying. Okay. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So Michigan would do it for him. Wisconsin, I think, probably less likely than Michigan. But I'm not big on Michigan going that way either. And
that's a hard one to call.
Yeah. So he has a path to victory, but that path goes through Pennsylvania. I just don't see.
That is the key state. Actually, it's the Keystone State.
Yeah. I just don't see how he loses.
Daddy made it funny.
Yeah. I just don't see how he loses Pennsylvania. And now here's the interesting thing, though. Let's say you do swap out Pennsylvania. Well, I didn't mean to click on that, but let's say, so Trump loses, that takes Trump down to 268. But at 251, that gets us to 261, 270. So it becomes 270, I keep clicking things. It becomes 270 to 268. And Kamala Harris wins.
Right.
This one swap overturns the whole election.
Yep. It is definitely the key state. And understandably, that's why they've both been spending a lot of time there.
Yeah, they have to. Now I can click on Pennsylvania. This is what Pennsylvania looks like on the RCP average, 0.2%. It's 50-50.
Yep. That's not a good place. Well, okay. That's not a good place to be, but you got to remember, we've done this, I don't know how many times now, Dale, but there's about a +3 to +5 advantage that is hidden for the Republican candidate.
A lot of talk this week has been about the actual makeup of the voter distribution in the polling. I hate talking about polls because we've done this every 4 years.
God, it's just, yes.
And it's been different every election cycle. But
we were for them, we were against them. Like, we have to believe them.
yeah,
We don't have to believe them.
the problem is that the polls are the only data that we have. But when you start looking into the crosstabs,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like they're oversampling Democrats.
They are. In Pennsylvania, that's really interesting because new Republican registrations are outpacing Democratic registrations by at least double. I think it might be even more than that. Scott Pressler, I listened to, he's up there doing a lot of work trying to register people to vote. And he was saying that he's getting a lot of active involvement and he's getting a lot of volunteers. There's a good ground game going on in Pennsylvania. And if we want to get into like the nitty gritty of that kind of stuff, that's a super, super important part of any campaign. You've got to have people knocking on doors, going around, visiting people, ensuring that they're going to show up to the polls, offering them rides, like anything you can do.
Sure, I would point out that Scott Pressler is doing an independent effort, not part
That's
of the
right.
Trump
He's not
campaign.
even being paid.
And the
That's
Trump
right. It's not even for the Trump campaign.
And the Trump campaign has no such effort.
No, they do. They actually have a pretty good effort going on. It's just that they're basing it mostly in Western Pennsylvania. They've sort of given up on like Eastern Pennsylvania in the Philadelphia regions, which somehow always seem to have more votes than actual voters.
Yeah, funny how that works in Philly.
Yeah.
There's a couple of cities, Philly, Chicago, Atlanta.
Fulton County.
Things seem odd. But those are the numbers we have. And I think the thing that really just irks me is it's either so many people simply hate Donald Trump for whatever reason. And again, I think that gets us very deep back into our conversation about narratives. And the fact that Donald Trump personally is an unpleasant fella. I mean, personally, I just don't like Donald Trump. I think he's narcissistic and buffoonish on a personal level. And when he comes out with the Donald Trump Bible that he wants people to buy or the NFTs, I just find him an irksome person.
He is Mr. Monopoly.
Having said that, as president, even though I disagreed with him on some policies, I agreed with him on others. But again, I look at the principled way in which he limited executive power while he was president.
And that's my transactional argument he's a known entity. So is Kamala Harris. They're pretending that she's not, but she is. She's a complete moron. Even without the mental illness that Joe Biden suffers from, she's a complete freaking moron.
But I find myself saying the same thing that Hillary Clinton said in 2016. How can half the country?
How am I losing this guy?
Yeah. How are we losing to this chick? I mean, look up empty suit in the dictionary. Her picture's there.
She has literally accomplished nothing ever other than destruction of families. That's
when she was a prosecutor, she was really great at that.
I'm not even exaggerating there. That's literally her only accomplishment that wasn't on her back.
Yes.
While she was on her back.
Well, I mean, she did do other things than just be on her back. I mean, she spent a fair amount of time, on her knees.
Or knees, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Same old. But this is the state of the race. This honeymoon can't last forever, can it? I mean, at some point.
It won't last past the debate. There's going to be a debate on September 10th, I think. CBS, is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at some point, she has to actually go into an unscripted forum.
It's going to be a 3-against-1 debate, like the last debate, except Joe Biden, mentally challenged as he is, I think did a better job than what Kamala Harris is even capable of doing. She will say a lot of word salads, and Trump will just be like, that makes no sense. I have no idea what you're talking about.
The significance of the passage of time. Right. Yeah, it's these things that sound good to her, but
she tries to sound educated.
Yeah, she tries to
without
sound
knowing
erudite.
What being educated actually is.
Yes, this is something that I think is profound to say.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I got bad news for you.
Unburdened
by what has been.
What has been.
Yeah. Look, that's just pure Marxism. So we can
Marx would shame us.
We could get into parsing that, but we'll have to get into parsing that at a later date, because we're an hour and 41 minutes into this. So I think we've delivered this week's appropriate level of value. So let's cut it short here, and we'll talk to you again next week, Michael.
All right, brother.
Have a great week. And for everybody else, you've been watching the Observations podcast for Sunday, the 25th of August, 2024. Have a great week. We will talk to you again next time. Until then, so long.